Look at these broadheads. What do you think of those? These are some of the most magnificent pieces of archery equipment ever created. And they are crossbow broadheads. Problem with these really cool broadheads is one thing. They have one glaring problem. They have one glaring problem. And I'm going to look at this thing. How does he... They have one glaring problem. And I'm going to look at this thing. Oh, this is going to be a problem. You got to love live streams. So, they have one glaring problem. I'm going to mute this. Boy, there's a lot of this. I haven't done this in a while. Oh, this is going to be a problem. You got to love live streams. I've got it on my laptop too. And the problem is, this thing wants to do... I had this great intro planned. And it's... I can just sit here and poke buttons. That's not going to work. The problem is going to be... I'll fix it. I'll fix it this way. We're going to do this vertical. What do you think of that? Huh? We're going to do it vertical. If I can ratchet that down. All right. It's going to work. We're not going to be able... We're not going to not have this work here, okay? So, it's going to be vertical. How about that? It's going to be vertical. YouTube wants this one to be vertical. So, I'll turn a little bit so you can see my Excalibur sign. How's that? That work? Good Lord. I had this all figured out in the beginning, and then for whatever reason, my phone auto-picked, like, vertical, and I don't know how to change it because I'm looking at it. None of the buttons change it. I can flip the cameras and all that stuff. But anyway, good morning. I have my Dunkin' Donuts iced coffee, and I had this great intro planned, but hopefully you have your coffee too. And we have a really good live stream. I'm going to talk to you this morning about broadheads, crossbow broadheads. So chime in the comments. I got the laptop here. I got the comments and stuff. I can read some of that stuff, and we'll go back and forth and see what we got here. We have a bunch of people on here. Oh, yeah. We got all kinds of well pad slayers. Yeah, that's a Pennsylvania term, right? We have well pads here. You know what I mean? So we know all about that stuff. Well pad, food plot, all kinds of good stuff. I started this out showing you some really cool broadheads that I've had for a while. I actually never used these, never shot any of them. But my point was, these are magnificent broadheads. Look at them. Where's the camera? Right up there. Okay. So these are magnificent broadheads. They really are. There's a lot of good stuff going on in this broadhead if you look at it, okay? And look at it shine in the light, how beautiful that is. It really is a magnificent piece of equipment. And there's a bunch of things I like about it. One glaring problem with this broadhead is, look how small it is. It's tiny. And when I got them, they came in this really nice case. I mean, it's a very impressive piece of, it's like fine jewelry. Look at that shine in there and everything. But when I got them, I opened them up. I was all excited. And I'm like, these are going to be for the OB. I was going to shoot them out of Bunjie there with a heavy arrow. It's going to go through anything. It's going to go through a car door, right? This is going to be the ultimate in crossbow broadhead penetration. Then I realized why they penetrate so well. And one reason is they're tiny, right? You're not putting very much through that car door or the deer's hide or whatever else. This is just too small for me, and I wouldn't use it as a general principle. But, I mean, if you look at it, seriously, it's the size of my thumb, right? My thumb is bigger. Like, that's not good. It's a 1-inch cutting diameter, but it's just a tiny broadhead. And, you know, that's the problem. And the problem with the fixed blade is it never gets any bigger either. Like, it never opens. These always fail to open. Isn't that funny? But there are a couple things I want to talk about real quick on these broadheads, okay? So there's a bunch of tooth of the arrow broadheads. Brian Moore has commented tooth of the arrow broadheads. And the problem with a tooth of the arrow, too, is that it's small. You know what I mean? They make these things smaller so that they fly better, and then they're smaller and they don't do as much. They don't cut as much. So what, you know, kind of defeats the purpose in my eyes. So there's a few things I really like about this broadhead. This is, let's introduce it. It is an Iron Will. Okay, an Iron Will makes this kind of stuff. They're a neat company. Not sponsored by anybody, blah, blah, blah. But go check them out if you're interested in this kind of stuff. This is a very effective broadhead in a few ways, right? Setting aside the size. And the other thing I want to point out too, I bought them. I'm so into these. I don't know if you can see that there, but it says Bunjie on it. Can you see that? It says Bunjie right on the broadhead. I had it inscribed right there on the broadhead. That's pretty cool. Hopefully that's picking that up. But pretty neat. I'm going to get rid of that. Hopefully that doesn't ruin our thing. So hopefully you can see that. I got to do more of these live streams. You know what I mean? So if you guys like the live streams, we'll do more of them. Okay. I'm sorry I haven't been doing those, but we used to do a whole bunch of live streams. We used to do them once a week. Now, you know, it is what it is. But these are fun. I enjoy this kind of stuff. So yes, Brian Moore, Iron Will, good eye. Iron Will makes this kind of equipment. And a couple things I'll talk about. This is a crossbow broadhead. So one of the nice things about this dude is if we take a zombie slayer, for example, this is a crossbow broadhead, and we screw that on there. Look how the ferrule lines up with, it's like a fluted design that comes back here, fluted design, and it lines up with that insert. There's no ledge there to reduce penetration, create hazards for the arrow that'll break the arrow or anything like that. That's pretty cool. The other nice things about this design, it is easier to show you a broadhead on a shaft, isn't it? Learning as we go here. But look at this is single bevel, right? We hear about single bevels, but this is what a single bevel looks like. Notice how it's like a, you know, it's got the bevel here and the bevel going that way. It's a single bevel. Both bevels cut in the same direction, but what that will do upon impact is spin that arrow a little bit in the wild game or in the target or what have you. And it does do a twisting motion. One of the nice things about that is it twists the hide and opens it up. So you might not be limited to that 1-inch cutting diameter. You might be a little bit better, right? Keep in mind, this is only 1/8 of an inch over the state minimum in Pennsylvania. Like, it's a barely legal. So just keep that in mind. But that single bevel design is a very solid, and it's a very thick piece of steel, and it's sharpened, and it's too sharp for me to touch, and it's got all those positives as well. Also, nice thing about it, tanto tip, right? Or tanto tip, depending on how you pronounce it, whichever you prefer. But that tip is a bone breaking tip too, right? So this arrow, right? If I took this zombie slayer and this broadhead on Bunjie, right? This is probably going to get me a pass through just about all the time on a wild boar, regardless of where you hit, on a deer, regardless of where you hit, even on that old slow crossbow. And that is the appeal of these broadheads. You know, it is what it is. The other thing is it has little bleeders on it. So bleeders I think the idea behind those is to open up the flap a little bit so you don't have just a slit. You have like a little bit of a flap to let more blood flow out. That's the idea behind it. And rather than make it a 4-blade, it's technically a 4-blade, but rather than make it a real 4-blade design, these things are small and they just open up the hide a little bit more and leave that little slit in there. So that's all. That's the design of that. I really like the fact that the ferrule, as it comes up the broadhead here, does not interfere with cutting, right? Some of those things, you look at them, they have a hard shelf cut in them to them, or a design that looks like it would impede penetration. And the idea behind this is to not impede penetration when it comes to these broadheads, right? We'll get to some other broadheads here where I think the design is to actually impede penetration and reduce penetration, and that's a powerful thing. It's an important thing on some of these things. So pretty cool. So that is the Iron Will, right? This is 150 grainer. All the broadheads I'm talking about here pretty much are 150 grainers, all the ones I use except for one, and I'll show you why I switched from that one. I got a stack of them here, a whole stack of broadheads to go through. So some fun stuff. Let's look at some comments here. Who we got on here? We got oh, One-Eyed Archer did make it. Wow. Good morning, Bunjie-ites. That's great. Grim Reaper, Fatal Steel are my favorites. Haven't seen the Fatal Steel. That's cool. But I do like the Grim Reapers. That's just a cool name. And I really like the Pigman used the old Grim Reapers back in the day. Probably still does. Good stuff. I always like that stuff. Looking slick today, Rich. Yeah, getting ready for work. It is what it is, right? Got my work uniform on. My work outfit. 2-blade Reaper and Trypan for this guy. Ooh, we're getting to the Trypan here shortly. Hello to Missouri. Hello, Arkansas. Cool. Cool. There we go. We got people all over the place. George Keith, good morning to you. Good to hear from you. Hope to talk to you soon. Probably will. Probably will. Boomer Ranger Ron, aren't you supposed to be at work selling boats or something? Ron is an old-time friend of Bunjie, goes way back, you know, and he's always got something in the works. Always something exciting. That's great. More Pennsylvania people. Ontario, Canada. Hello up there. I hope you're enjoying the end of your summer here. Hemorrhage broadheads. I do not have familiarity with those. There's so many broadheads out there, and there's ones I like and ones I don't like, and that's what we're kind of going to be talking about here. That's kind of the way I'm looking at this stuff. And hello to West Virginia. Morning from Manitoba. Well, hello up there. And got Missouri on the line. But Manitoba, I was just up there not too long ago. That is a neat place. That's a whole different world from where this Pennsylvania boy grew up. I got to tell you. And it is neat. And it's inspired me to... one thing Manitoba lacks is two-man tree stands. How about that? I know that's just the outfitter by outfitter kind of consideration, but nonetheless, that was the one observation that I had. But Manitoba, really neat place. I learned a lot. My guide took an interest, knew and sort of recognized that I kind of took an interest in the local surroundings and the local lifestyle, that sort of thing, and the culture and the history behind his area. And he drove me around, showed me some scenes there behind the scenes, told me what was going on in the world in Manitoba. And Manitoba is a place where I was, real low population density, not a lot of people, but there's a lot going on. And it was very interesting. It was very insightful. Both good and bad. He didn't hold anything back. It was great. So this one, I'm going to show you another fixed blade broadhead. This is a Muzzy. No, it's not. It's a bolt cutter from Excalibur, masquerading as a Muzzy, because all of these are Muzzies. Muzzy makes some great broadheads. They're the king of fixed blade broadheads in my eyes, really, because they've got the history behind them and everything else. But the reality is they're all the same, right? They're just a bunch of 3-blade, chisel tip, whatever. This is too small. It's just tiny, right? Like it's, where'd it go? Where'd it go? Ooh, there it is. It's like a magic trick or something for little kids. Just a tiny broadhead. And these can be effective, right? That iron will has its place, right? This has its place. And it has its place in the history of Death by Bunjie, because I killed my first crossbow deer, my first crossbow buck, with this broadhead, or one of these. And I've kept them ever since, just to show them for a little demonstration like this. But I would never, ever use this again, me personally. 150 grainer, right? Excalibur sold this. This is before Excalibur sold any 100 grainers. They only sold 150s, right? So they were telling you the speed of their crossbows with a 350 grain arrow rig, and only selling you a 150 grain broadhead, which made their arrow rig 400 grains. So you could not achieve with their equipment the speeds that they advertised. But nonetheless, these little guys, right, can get the job done. They've got the broken up, right? They got the holes in the blades. And I think part of the idea on that is to get the weight balance correct, so that we're not at 200 grains or whatever. But also the purpose of that is to, so they're not working like vanes, right? And steering your arrow any more than necessary. Beyond 20 yards, you really got to work to get these things to be accurate, in my experience. And the other problem I had with these was, this is where I learned about 15 years ago, where that not all broadheads, you can't just screw them on and shoot them, right? I kind of learned that. 15 years ago, there wasn't the internet as much. There wasn't as much information out there. There was no Death by Bunjie. Not that that's your only source for crossbow information, but there wasn't really a wealth of crossbow information back then. And a real limit to the information you had. You were getting most of your crossbow information from compound bow hunters, and not all that translates, right? It's not all the same thing. Not all archery is created equal. It's not. But I would get information, and you had to sort of translate that to crossbows. And I learned over time, and I learned from my mistakes is how I did it. Hopefully we avoid some of that now in this day and age. We can share information and avoid a lot of those mistakes and jumpstart people's journeys in crossbow hunting. But this broadhead, I will say at 20 yards, my first buck, 15 yards away, shot it, went through this thing and buried it in the dirt, went through the deer and buried it in the dirt, up to 8 inches with an old slow crossbow with Bunjie. So it can be done. This broadhead has penetration power. It's got the chisel tip, right? It's 150 grains, and it really has the penetration power that you're looking for in this. So, man, pretty cool stuff. Eric Colbert, 350 plus 150, 500 grains. No, that's not what I'm talking about. The arrow itself from Excalibur, right? I'm talking about the Excalibur shaft. Up here, right in these stacks, right here, I've got old
Pro Flights and all the other arrows from Excalibur. They sell arrows, the shaft that they were selling at the time, the fire bolts or the Pro Flights, those were, they didn't sell Pro Flights back then when I'm talking about this, but those arrows are 250 grains, right? So if you put a 100 grain tip on, you got 350, and that's what they got their speeds with. That's what they're still doing. And if you put a 150 on it, brings it up to 400. I'm talking about the total arrow rig, the total arrow weight, which is actually a really good point here. Man, we got all kinds of people on here. This is great. Well, thank you guys for joining me. I really appreciate the fact we got people joining me on here, and my daughter's on here. Aren't you supposed to be at work? She's supposed to be at work, on her way to work. She's getting ready for work. So we'll get there. We'll be at work on time. But this is a good time to bring up this, all right? If you are hunting with one, and this is, most of you guys know this, but I want to point this out. You can't say this stuff enough. Again, part of the point of Death by Bungie is to make sure that new people who are coming into crossbow, I want more people to hunt with crossbows, more and more people to hunt with crossbows. The more people who are hunting with crossbows, the greater likelihood that crossbows become more and more legal and more acceptable. So that's why I am inspiring people and encouraging people to hunt with crossbows. And I want you to be successful. The easiest way for somebody to hunt with a crossbow and decide they don't want to do it is to have problems, right? And you're going to have problems. That's just the nature of any new enterprise that you involve yourself in. But if I tell you this, right, you're hunting with a 150 grainer, right, or this next guy we're going to talk about, well, actually that is a 150 grainer, but, or if you've got 100 grain Rage, right, we're going to talk about them in a second. Ooh, Rage, I love the Rages. But if you're hunting with a 150 grainer, you ought to be using a 150 grain field point, right, to practice in the backyard and to sight in with. And then we're going to sight in with one of these guys too, in a special target that accepts broadheads, and make sure that they're flying properly and adjust for that. But 150 grain broadhead, 150 grain field point. On the other hand, if you're a 100 grainer, right, you got the 100 grain Rage Hypodermic, then we're going to use the 100 grain field point. Just make sure you remember that. Not everybody knows that or keeps that in mind, but 50 grains is going to make some difference. And the farther out you reach, the more difference that's going to make. So we need to be very aware of that and sighting in for the proper stuff. So 150 grainer, use 150 grain tip. If you're using a 125 grain, you got to buy the 125 grain field points. 125 grain always seemed like the odd thing. Like 100 or 150. Like why do they make them in the middle? But whatever. I don't know. That was just me. This is the next one. The problem with this guy is it's too small, and I had problems with accuracy, right, with the fixed blades. So I started looking at what can I do to get a bigger cutting diameter, right? And at the time, I was unwilling to move away from the manufacturer. Like Excalibur sold a couple of different broadheads. If you want a mechanical, it was in my mind that I ought to stick with what Excalibur makes, because it gave me the greatest likelihood that it would work with the rest of their equipment, which I was using at that time. And that was this guy, right? This is their version of it. I think it is called, what's this called? Somebody chime in here. What is this guy? What is this guy? It's not a Knapp Spitfire, but it is. It's the Excalibur version of it, right? They're all muzzies. They're all muzzies. But it's the Excalibur version of it, and this is a top-down design, okay? I think this is 100 grain or 150 grain, I can't remember. But this thing, it's the Excalibur version of it. Gosh, I can't remember. Darn it. Anyway, chisel tip, real nice. Love the chisel tip. That goes in there, and once that hits, these hit the hide. These little fingers right here will hit the hide, and then it forces them to open, okay? So these are all opening up, and now you have this cutting diameter, okay? So there's your cutting diameter as this thing's going through the animal. And that opens up on the entrance wound and the exit wound. And they're consistent. Like I had no real issues with these until I did have an issue with them. That's what everybody always says. The mechanicals work until they don't work. And this is the only broadhead that I've ever used that did not open. And I know it did not open, right? I'm not just saying, oh, it didn't open. You know, a lot of people say that. I hate that excuse. Oh, never found the deer or anything, but the broadhead didn't open. That's why I didn't find the deer. Yeah, I don't know about that. Because I found the deer, okay? And this was closed inside the deer. And that video is on YouTube. And the hole, the entrance wound, was the size of my pinky. It was very clearly this entrance wound. It did not open. It simply did not open in a deer at 20 yards from the old slow crossbow. Now, could be a lot of reasons for that, whatever. But I decided I wasn't going to use these anymore because that happened. But I want to point out something real quick. That shot was still perfect, and it killed that deer with ease because the deer ran 80 yards, but this was enough to kill the deer on that perfect shot. So my point is, get it? I don't like that excuse. I still don't like that excuse. And don't tell me your broadhead didn't open unless you can find it. And the other thing too, one little tip on broadheads. Now, this does not have it on here, but one little thing. I'm gonna show you one other thing here. Hopefully we got enough time for all this stuff. This is there's one there. I have a lot of various containers, right? And they've been decorated by Genevieve Sliced twice. When we got into the Swhackers, she designed that for me. But I see right here, I've got one of the little pieces, okay? There's this little aluminum job that goes on a lot of these broadheads, okay? So when you're screwing it on the shaft, and we're going to grab another shaft here. Yeah, that is the right one. Very good. We're going to take our zombie here, and we're going to screw that bad boy in there. And you can see, very important on broadheads, you don't want that shelf. You want this to seamlessly go across and be one smooth transition onto the arrow shaft. It shouldn't be, if it's greater than that and it gets smaller on the shaft, that's one thing. But on the other hand, that'll make it hard to pull out of a target. But that's still better going through a deer, because a bigger broadhead and ferrule dropping down to a smaller shaft going through a deer is better than, or any animal, is better than having a ledge. You don't want the smaller ferrule leading up to a bigger shaft. That's a no-no, because that's just going to jeopardize the connection here. That reduces arrow integrity for all of the Ashby fans who might be watching. So, and it's just a fact. You don't want that risk of snapping that broadhead off in a deer, because the shaft does no good compared to having the broadhead on the end of it. You really want it intact going through the animal. So what happens is, of course, you got the chisel tip, the feet, opens that up. But what happens is, and you can see it on here, actually, maybe I can even show you. When these blades snap open, they do it with a lot of force. So when that broadhead opens, it comes back, and can you see how that hits that aluminum ring? Okay, do you see how that is working there? I'll see if I can get it where we can see it. But that little foot stops against it. It doesn't hit the shaft. That's why you've got that ring on there. It doesn't hit the insert. It doesn't hit the shaft. It doesn't hit that brass insert. It hits that silver ring and snaps on there. And the result of that, now when you pull this out of the dirt, it closes the blades, right? You pull it out of the animal, it closes the blade sometimes. But the point is, if you look, there are, and I'll see if I can get this in focus. I'm going to put my hand here so it has the focus. But do you see, ooh, there's one right there. These have all been used. All these old broadheads have been used. But do you see that? I got it right lined up. Just about perfect. Do you see the little mark on that aluminum ring? That is where that foot, right there's another one. See that? Right there is perfect. If you can see it right there in the middle of that ring. That is where that foot came back and slammed against that ring. And that is evidence that this broadhead has opened. It's also evidence that this broadhead has opened more than once, because those rings, there's multiple rings on there, right? You'll have 3 rings every time you use it. And then if you are 3 dents, 3 little marks on that ring every time you use it. And if you rotate that, next time you screw it on there, it's a little different, and you shoot it through another animal or whatever. And you can sharpen these a little bit. You can even replace them if you want, but that's like, you got to be a jeweler and have special equipment to do that. I can't do that. My eyes are not going to support that. So there you go. That is that style of broadhead. And today they make a 150 grain version of this, if I remember correctly. That's called a Trailblazer. This one, I forget the name of it. X-Act. This is the X-Act from Excalibur. There it is. There it is. The coffee's kicking in. Got my brain going here. Jason has pointed out, yes, Trailblazer, that is the modern, that's the one they sell now, which is a bigger, it's the one I would recommend to use. Just as a side note, I only use 150s. The 150s, the reason I use 150s, and this is not a Trailblazer, but this is another version of that style of broadhead where the feet are like this. It hits, chisel tip enters, the feet hit like this. and that opens up. And this is definitely a 150 grainer because it's big, but this is a big broadhead. This was sent to me by a friend of Bunjie. It is not a broadhead that I have used. It was sent to me by a very dear friend of Bunjie who wanted me to just see it and review it, and not review it, but look at it. So to add to my repertoire, right? Yes, a double lung shot with a field point will kill. Agree 100%. That doesn't mean that's what we're trying to do, right? That doesn't mean that's what we want. It doesn't mean that a field point or a small broadhead at that size is acceptable, but it means that, and I think correctly, that even if your broadhead doesn't open, if you made a good shot, you should have killed the deer, right? It doesn't matter whether the broadhead opens or not. This broadhead, those iron wills, look how small this thing is, right? Like this and this, they're not too far off. And we're going to do another example right here in the very near future. Let's talk about the difference between the 100s and the 150s a little bit. And I think this is a good way to demonstrate the difference. And the reason why I prefer, personally, a 150 grainer. So I just shoot the 150 grainers. The 150 grainer, first of all, every shot you got that extra 50 grains on there, and that's going to save your limbs a little bit. That's the idea anyway. It takes more energy to push a heavier arrow, right? A 400 grain down field, or a 450 than it does a 350, right? Adding that 150 grains puts a little more energy into the arrow, and it means that there's a little less leftover energy in the crossbow to damage the crossbow. That's the idea. So I think 350 is too light. Don't use a 350 grain arrow rig. And I'm talking there about the total weight of the arrow. Even though Excalibur gets their speeds that way, don't do that, right? Accept the fact that your crossbow does not shoot as fast as what Excalibur says it shoots, because 350 grains is not a real arrow weight. It simply isn't. You have to shoot 400 to 450-ish or better, right? We've got somebody on here saying shoot at least 500 grains. You shoot 500 grains all the time, you can't go wrong with that, right? You're slowing the crossbow down considerably, but you buy a faster crossbow, right? Just buy a faster crossbow to offset that extra weight, maybe. There's a lot of different ways to do this stuff, but I just want to point out that I do think 350 is too light overall. I was shooting these 350 total arrow weight, right? This is a 100 grain Rage Crossbow Hypodermic. Loved this broadhead. This was my dream broadhead, and I worked so hard with Bunjie to try and get Bunjie to be able to push this through a deer on a repeatable, constant, consistent basis. Very difficult to do. Very difficult to do. This is an energy sucking broadhead. It is like this in flight, okay? Going like this. These tabs hit the deer and push down, and kaboom, there you go. Now, there's things I like about this. It does have that hypodermic tip, which is very consistent with a, to me, that's very similar to a chisel tip, and I like that. That will go through, that'll push those ribs apart. It will chip through those ribs. It'll go through some bone or whatever sometimes. But, and also, if you look, there's nothing here really. It's a very sleek design. Now, this is pretty steep. So that takes a lot of energy to push that through a deer. It takes energy to open, energy to push through a deer because of this design, this blade angle. This angle is a lot easier to push through a deer than this angle. If we go back to these guys, look at the difference in angle, right? This is a much sleeker angle and easier to push through a deer than this would be. It's just common sense. Same thing with this guy. This is real wide. That's going to be harder to push through a deer than something like this. It's bigger. Bigger is harder to put. Bigger takes more energy, but this takes less energy than this. This is going to take a lot of energy, but it's going to, the offset of that is, right, you get a lot more cutting diameter. That's a, you can see it's been used, but it's been used a few times, because if you look how chewed up that cap is. But so you got the hypodermic tip, pushes through, but there's nothing about these little feet that impedes penetration. If we go back to this guy, right, same thing there, right? You got a pretty sleek design. That's going to go through a deer. Okay. I didn't have too much problem with penetration here. That was more of a broadhead opening. But when we go to the 150 grain Rage, the Rage Trypan, right? Same cutting angle, which is going to, a little bit better, actually. It looks like it's a little bit better than the, it's about the same. Maybe a little bit better, a little sleeker, right? A little more angled down, but same hypodermic tip. This is the Trypan 150 grainer, and it has a little sleeker angle on the blades, a little heavier blade. And if you look at the difference in terms of construction, this is a pretty dainty little thing compared to this. This is a meatier broadhead. That extra 50 grains goes into a heavier ferrule. It goes into heavier blades and everything. You can look and see the difference, okay? I used these, really liked them, had no flaw. The only problem I had with this was the crossbow had trouble pushing that through a deer, which is the crossbow's fault, not the broadhead's fault necessarily. Well, that's a combination. You can blame whoever you want to blame for that. But this one, never had a problem with it. These are just a good, solid broadhead. The complaint that I have, maybe I can point this out a little bit here. I'm getting a pen. If you look right here, do you see that little tabby? Now that is the foot that opens up the broadhead and pushes those blades down so they open up. But if you look at it like that, you can see why that would impede penetration a little bit, right? I think as crossbow hunters, we don't have to worry about that as much. But you can see how that little foot sticking out right there, that is not a sharp cutting instrument. That is flat and dense, and if it hits a bone or something like that, it's going to slow you down. It's going to slow you down, right? And that's just a consideration. It's not a reason to not use these. It's just something to keep in mind. Faster crossbows, I don't think it matters, right? If you're shooting 400 feet per second, this probably, I don't care about the small, minute amount of penetration loss due to that. I don't care about that. Okay, that's my thoughts on the subject. So the 150 grains gives you a little extra momentum anyway, gives you a little bit more front of center. It's going to push that through a deer. You're going to have no problems anyway. Brian Moore hit the nail right on the head. This is the X-Act. It finally came to me, but absolutely. So, friend of Bunjie, Ron, is going to shoot the SEVR 150 grain Robusto. I have allergies, you'll have to forgive me. The SEVR Robusto. So, check out this little guy, a gift from a friend of Bunjie. What do you think of that, Boomer Ranger Ron? The SEVR Robusto. This is a, you're getting some high-class equipment when it comes in its own independent case for one broadhead, right? I don't know what these things cost. Never shot this thing. Do appreciate it. It is an interesting thing. It was sent to me again by a friend of Bunjie. Not one I've used, but let's talk about that a little bit. You open up this little case. It's like fine jewelry, right? I love broadhead companies that look at their product with great respect and ship it in a beautiful container, although I question the cost of this. So you got this extra thing right here. This thing probably costs quite a bit. Cool thing about these, you can reuse them though. They have a hole right here where you can put a screw in there, lock those blades down so that they can't open up. You practice with this, back that screw out, make sure you're doing that, and then shoot it. It's 150 grainer, love it. Look at that tip, right? That is a chiseled tip if I ever saw one, right? Let's block that a little bit. Look at that beautiful tip. Oh, that's going to break whatever it hits. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. And these, it's going to open because these are the little tabs that hit the hide. And they're going to force these blades to open up, right? And you got that little rubber band on there. So you're going to have rubber bands on hand to reuse these, that sort of thing. Probably replace blades. It does have a little screw here where you can replace the blades. So it can be done. I like this design, okay? Now, you're going to get, it's a 2-inch. I'm not going to break that band because I do want to use this thing down the road at some point. I've been saying this for like 2 years. It's not new. But it does have a 2-inch cutting diameter according to them. And 2-blade, so 2 inches and a 2-blade. I like that calculation. I'm always a little skeptical when I see the cutting diameter on a 3-inch like this. Oh, this is a 3-inch cutting diameter. Oh, because if you add up add up this blade and then this blade and then this, I don't care about that. Quit doing that. Quit pretending that this cuts a lot. It doesn't. It's tiny, right? It's smaller than my thumb, right? So it's kind of like, I think the broadhead manufacturers, when they try to sell you on the cutting diameter of a blade like this, they're like the people that measure televisions, right? It's like, can't you just tell me that the television is 48 inches by 30 inches? Why do you have to pretend that it's 75 inches? When they're measuring from like the outside of this corner to the outside of that corner, the farthest distance possible to tell you how big the TV is. Just tell me its dimension. Like, why do you gotta? We know why, right? It's to pretend that it's bigger than it really is. Although some TVs today are pretty big. They're pretty big. But this is tiny. And you can measure it every which way, and it's still not going to cut as much as one of these guys, for example, right? They have their place. I'm not being overly critical here. I'm being critical, but not overly critical, perhaps. But the SEVR Robusto has its place, too, and I am going to test that at some point down the road here and see what we think of that. Let's look at some comments real quick. Rage 125s, crossbow heads, too. Yep. The 125s, like I said, it just feels like use the 125s if that fits in with your overall plan. I have no objection to that. Of course, you should do that if you're thinking about it and you think it's going to work. Go for it, not a problem. Wasp Archery Jackhammer. I have heard of them. That's the best mechanical out there in his opinion, in Scott's opinion. I've never had a deer get away from being hit by one. That speaks to accuracy, which does speak to the quality of the broadhead. It tells me that that broadhead is accurate, right? Some of them are just not accurate. I've seen videos online before of broadheads that just will not fly straight. And you can spend time tuning them and get them to work, but I'd rather spend my time scouting and preparing to hunt than I would tinkering around with a broadhead and trying to get it to work. I want one that's going to work. One other Rage we'll talk about real quick. This is the Rage Crossbow Ultimate X or something. I don't know, whatever it is. But it's another Rage, another variation of our Trypan and our Hypodermic. However, it has a different head, and I'm not a fan of this. I just wanted to point it out. Use it. There's people on here, I guarantee you, that have used this with great success. I'm certain it has its place, but I don't like a knife tip on the end of my broadhead. That doesn't make sense to me. I don't need to cut through bone. I need to chisel through bone. If you're going to, break bone when you're processing a deer or something like that, you don't take a knife and hit it with a rock. You take a chisel and hit it with a rock. Chisels have their place. Let's look at some more comments, because I got one more I'm going to talk about here. SWAT crossbow mags. A lot of people, SWATs I don't have, but I get recommended to SWATs. Does SWAT make a 150? That's a question that I have, though. But so there we go. Tried the SEVR once, made it through a buck, but just barely poked out the other side. 320 feet per second bow at 20 yards. Yeah, something that won't go. It does matter what we're using for crossbows, right? Speed is exactly half of the equation for momentum. So it's speed times the weight of the arrow. You can increase the arrow weight, which apparently George has done because he's taken his whatever crossbow it is, right? George is an Excalibur guy. A lot of his stuff is Excalibur. And he's put heavier arrows on it, apparently. And even with that, he slowed the crossbow down, but still going not out the other side of the deer. We deserve pass-throughs as crossbow hunters. We demand pass-throughs as crossbow hunters. There is no excuse for a deer running off with your arrow if you're hunting with a crossbow, not in 2024. So that's what we got to go. So there we go. Paul, have a good day. Thanks for joining us. I appreciate that. I took 4 deer this year with a Rage Crossbow, had not a problem. With pass-throughs, a Rage in the cage works. Yep, Boomer Ranger Rom, I'm right there with you. Chinese range, they call these the China Dermics, right? You can buy them off eBay, get a knockoff one, and they call them China Dermics. I think that's the funniest thing. But they do make knockoff broadheads. I don't use knockoff stuff. I try not to, right? I tried to not to be. But if you go into it knowing what you're getting and you test it, I don't think there's a problem with that. If it's working for you, do it. Yep. The Rage X. I think this is the Rage X. And like I said, I knew there's going to be somebody on here. These are the most popular broadheads on the planet, okay? And I'm a big guy when it comes to markets. Like, I will take the word of a market over anecdotal evidence any day of the week. Like somebody getting on a forum saying, I don't, Rage stinks, and I shot a deer and I lost it. That is less important to me than the fact that these things sell like hotcakes and they're still selling, right? They are the market. People put their money where their mouth is, and they aren't buying pack after pack after pack of these if they don't work. And that it's that simple. People are Rage is the most popular broadhead out there, right? I think after that it's Muzzy. These aren't Muzzies, but they're Muzzies. You know what I'm saying? SRJ is using the iron wills. Keep me posted on how that works. I am not knocking iron will at all. Not one bit. They're a company that's found their niche, what they're doing. They're really not marketed toward crossbows until now. They recognize the value of marketing toward crossbows. But these broadheads, they really, for what they are, right? For if you want a single bevel, this is one of the best single bevels you can get, right? So there's that option up there. Some of the comments are great. I just love these live streams. Last one. I'm going to show you. I don't know if you ever heard me talk about these before, or if you ever heard me, what this is. But this is my current broadhead of choice. And it has a couple identifying features that I really like. It's got that chisel tip right there. See that chisel tip? In fact, if this ferrule gets bent and it's no longer any good, unscrew this with a pair of pliers and clean it up good. And save it in case you need to rebuild one down the road. But this little tip right here, it screws off. And I've got right in here, there's some of them in here, right? I can look around right here. right there. See that? That's a chisel tip off of a former Swahacker. And here's the little screw, right? That little screw is right here. It's this little screw. I save those too and clean them up a little bit with a little brush. A little fine brush. There's that jeweler equipment again. But you clean that up. I got 3 chisel tips and 3 screws. And I can use them later on down the road, if need be, to rebuild one of the Swahackers, because I bought a ton of these things back in the day. In fact, you can see them right there. Look at that right there. Where are we? Oh, get my pen out. This will make it a little easier. Right there on the shelf is a pile of Swahackers. That's not even all of them. I got a bunch of these things. Because this is the Swahacker 150 grain, 3-inch cutting diameter, 251. And they don't make it anymore. But the neat thing is the 243 is the exact same thing. Okay, it is absolutely no different. I called the company and asked them specifically to verify this. I had one-eyed archer measure them to make sure they're the same. And, you know, because I don't own any of the 243s, I guess they are. But that package right there, I bought every one of these things I could get when I found out they were going to stop making the crossbow one. Because I like the gray, right? The 243 is like green or black or something. It's black. But I like the gray. And I like the fact that this is, you know, because I've been using them and I've had fantastic success with them. I put these through a bear on an older slow crossbow. I put one of these through a bear with a newer, faster crossbow. I have put this through deer after deer after deer, through a hog even, at 40 yards with the OB and a spinal tap arrow. Can't beat that. Like a 600 grainer total arrow weight. Pretty cool stuff. This has a band on it, right? They come with, and they got a ton of bands. Like, yeah, I got right here in my Swahacker case. I've got right in here. I don't know if you can see it, but like there's a ton of bands right in here too. And the practice points, I don't think they sell the practice points with these anymore. In the past, they were part of that, but I put them in there. I bought a bunch of practice points, and we can buy the practice points separate, which is this little guy. And the cool thing about these, right? I'm going to blow this band off here so we can see it, because I got tons of bands, and I'm going to, you know, I rebuild them anyway. But and with the, I'm putting 2 bands on them now because I'm using faster crossbows. I don't think it needs 2 bands necessarily, but my bands are kind of old. These are packages I bought years ago. And every deer you've seen me kill in the last 2 years has been with a used one, right? I let Genevieve use the brand new ones. I just rebuild them for me and use the used ones. I bought a bunch of blades, and I just take the little screw out. I save the parts, that kind of stuff. So the Swahacker is my favorite. This is my current favorite, right? But watch, when this hits the deer, the chisel tip gets in there. And, oh, I should say, before, one of the reasons I quit using this, the last deer I shot with this, with the Scorpion Deathstalker, with B3, the slick black Cadillac, this deflected. And by deflection, I mean hit the deer like this, turned, and the arrow came out back here. That is a problem with these. It's a problem with any broadhead, really. It can be. Not so much with fixed blades, but because what happens is this tabby, right? I was talking about those tabs, gets caught on something and it redirects the arrow and that sort of thing. And it's, you know, you can have a problem with that. You can have a problem with that. This, on the other hand, I've never had a deflection with these, and that's a reason why we switched over to the Swahackers. These are known for being able to shoot at odd angles because of that long shaft coming out there with the chisel tip. Gets in there, sinks in there good. And then these tabs hit, right? And then and the arrow's already in there that far by the time that happens. And then notice that these are sharpened, okay? They're going to cut hide, but they're also going to open up the broadhead. And when they do, watch that band, they'll peel these open. Oop, band just went for a ride. But these open up, and now we're cutting through the animal with brand new blades. Very steep angle. That's a hard angle to push out the other side. But I haven't had too much trouble doing so for 2 reasons. One is it doesn't take a ton of energy to open this broadhead, unlike some of the other mechanicals. This guy takes a lot of energy right on impact. These take a ton of energy right on impact to open up. This doesn't take as much. They're sharpened. It's a 1-inch cutting diameter. Opens up, and then boom. The other reason that it doesn't take too much to push this out the other side of an animal is the fact that these are sharp. Every broadhead we've looked at only gets duller going through the deer. After impact, it's hit dirt, it's hit hide, it's hit bone, whatever have you. Even the perfect little fixed blade, right, that doesn't have to open up, still gets duller as it goes through the deer. This one gets sharper, right, because That opens it. And then these guys are cutting with brand new blades as they go through the animal. They slice through the animal. There's Miss Genevieve going off to work. About time you're going off to work.
What you looking at? Hi.
Aw. Thanks for saying hi.
Yeah.
We're wrapping up here with the Swahackers. Do you like those? You heard of them?
I'm familiar.
Yeah. Once or twice, right? So have fun at work, kid.
Okay.
I'll be down there shortly. So this thing though, real steep angle, but it's real sharp going out the other side. So you got fresh blades hitting the bone. It is cutting the organs and the veins and the arteries with sharp blades as it goes through the animal. Sharp blades, brand new, untouched, sharp blades. And those organs, those arteries, those lungs, those veins, they do not dull a broadhead very much. Then it pokes out through the ribs on the other side or hits bone, whatever it does, or the hide or whatever it's doing. And it also, now it's got to cut its way out, right, as it's going through that animal. But it can do it with brand new sharp blades that have not touched hide. They have not touched bone, right? Cool design. I really like it. And I've had good success with them. Now, I'm not saying that's the one you got to use, but I'm saying that's the one you got to use. That's all. How's that? You like that? All right, let's look at what we got here for comments. One-eyed archers, Swhackers, Swahackers, even spelled it correctly, right? We've adopted a new spelling of Swahacker. Leaves the best blood trail I've ever seen. You can follow the blood trail by smell. That's a fact. I have had the best, most consistent blood trails with that. I've had a couple where they weren't fantastic blood trails, whatever, but nothing's gonna. It depends on the shot and all that sort of thing. But the exit wound is 3 inches and it's fantastic. So. I personally never had a problem with range. Ditto. This is Carvin 2003. I personally never had a problem with rage. I switched to Swhacker from seeing videos of rage failures. I never had a problem with rage other than that deflection, right? And deflection isn't the end of the world. I mean, you're cutting a swath through something. And the nice thing about it is if you make a bad shot on these with these guys, like, people never talk about they talk about plan B broadheads and all that stuff. Oh, this is plan B in case you hit bone and all the other stuff. What if you hit in the gut, right? The deer's easing forward. You take a shot thinking you're getting lungs and you hit guts. You want this in the guts or do you want this in the guts? I mean, come on, it's a no-brainer, right? This opened up a hole so big on my bear in Maine that the intestines and whatnot were on the outside by the time I found that bear, right? That is, even on a gut shot, right? A little bit of liver and guts. This is the swath that you need in those plan B situations that people talk about, to me. So, yeah, we got other people chiming in on the Swahackers too. So yeah, good stuff. I really do like those. I don't think you got to use, you can use whatever you want here. Just know your equipment, know its limitations. I'm sure there's limitations with these too. It is an aluminum ferrule. It can bend and all that stuff. I don't take fancy shots. I don't shoot, through like aiming on a deer that's quartering to me specifically. Although I think that, because that's going to wad this up. This is not as durable necessarily hitting the shoulder blade as this one. I did hit with the OB, right? The old slow crossbow. Hit a deer in shoulder blades with this. It went through the shoulder blade on this side and poked out the shoulder blade on the other side. It had the momentum. These blades open like this are tough to push out another shoulder blade. Like that's not going to happen. It wadded them right up and embedded them in that shoulder blade. It was trying its best, and that deer couldn't go anywhere. I had both shoulder blades pinned with a zombie slayer arrow. That video is on YouTube too. Pretty much all my videos are on YouTube, but then the other thing I'll show you too, people worry about whether they're going to open or not. Like we talked about that a little bit with this guy. If this doesn't open, I still killed a deer. This is the only broadhead I ever have confirmed that did not open, right? And not knocking the broadhead, other than that is why I switched away from that broadhead and that style. But that's not a real big hole if it doesn't open, but it was enough to kill the deer. So I could confirm that it didn't open. This never opens, right? This is as big as it's going to get. But if the Swhacker doesn't open, here's what's cool about it, right? Look at this. It's the same, right? It's the same. 1 inch cutting diameter. Actually, it's a little bigger because, again, they do their 1 inch. They're counting all the blades and all that stuff. But, like, this is tiny. Like, it's smaller than the Swhacker, right? No matter which way I do it. It is not as wide as the Swhacker. Like, it's not as wide. So, like, that Swhacker reaches out past that. So, even if this doesn't open, like, this right here is this is a practice point. It doesn't open up. It's just those two blades. This is a legal, don't take my word for that. Diameter-wise, this is legal in Pennsylvania. And it's actually has more reach than this. This will reach out and touch more than this fixed blade broadhead. I know 3 blades and all that stuff, but, you know, that's still, my guide in Maryland referred to them. It's like shooting a nickel, you know, little tiny thing. What do the juries call this? They call them pea shooters. That's a pea shooter according to the juries. So just throwing that out there. I really do think a mechanical in this day and age is appropriate on a modern crossbow. And I think the 150 grainer instead of the 100 grainer, you know, depending on if you think your arrow's out and you've got a certain weight in mind and you reach that weight with 100 grainer and you build your arrow around the 100 grain point, that makes sense to me too. Well, I really appreciate everybody. People are saying they're late for work. Well, just as important as being late for work is I'm about out of coffee. But I got to tell you, having people join me for coffee and crossbows this has been a fun talk. I've enjoyed talking about my broadheads here. I've been thinking about this all week and I'm excited about doing it. I think I covered everything I want to cover. And if you have additional questions, throw them in the comments. I will get on there and I will comment and participate in that stuff too. If you like doing coffee with crossbows, let me know. We can do this lots of times, right? I can get ready for work and still make it to work. And it's just a good time for me. I was telling people earlier on, I get up between 5 and 6 in the morning anyway, you know, when it's time to get up. And both of the books that I wrote most of those books between 5 o'clock in the morning and 7 o'clock in the morning, you know, before I went to work. So it's when my mind is most active and I'm drinking coffee and all that stuff. It's my routine. So if it fits your routine too, let me know. Do you have to get a pass-through to get the Swhacker to work? You should get a pass-through regardless of which one you're using. And if you don't, you need to change something up, either a faster crossbow, a heavier arrow, or a different broadhead, right? That's the way I look at it. I really believe pass-throughs, it is unacceptable in 2024 for a crossbow hunter not to get a pass-through. Maybe the shot was bad, that kind of stuff too, and you got to work on that. There's various things that go into getting a pass-through, but pass-throughs are mandatory. To get the best performance of any broadhead, not just the Swhacker, you have to get a pass-through, right? This does not cut an exit hole unless you get a pass-through. But this cuts on its way through, all right? This is when it hits the deer, and then it opens up, okay? So this is what's cutting the lungs, the arteries, the heart, the veins, the liver, the guts, whatever. This is what's doing the cutting. And it's doing it with sharp blades that have not touched hide, that have not touched bone or anything like that. Only upon exit does it finally get to the point where it's going to touch hide and bone. And it's going to touch bone first with the sharpest blades. It touches the bone, cuts through the bone, gets through the bone. And then after it's been dulled up by the bone a little bit, it has to push its way through the hide. Kind of the reverse of every other broadhead, right? They start on the hide, get a little bit dulled up. Hair and hide is a dulling substance. Like, that doesn't make things sharper, right? Don't discount the amount of abuse a broadhead can take going through hide, especially in hogs, because they're a mess, right? They're full of dirt and everything else. So that dulls a broadhead, but hitting those bones is what chinks them up good, serrates them, and makes them a little bit. When you see serrations on the other side of your broadhead when it comes out, that's dull, right? Like this dent. Those are dents. Those are not serrations. They're not a steak knife that is now tuned to cut meat or whatever. They are dented, right, and wadded up, and that will be a problem. When you see that, you know that and by the time you get that, though, the broadhead's already done its damage. The value of the pass-through, just to perfectly answer that question and completely answer that question, in my opinion, the value of the pass-through with these is that's where you get your blood trail, right? You got a 1 inch going in, and that is a higher shot out of a tree stand typically, probably a higher shot from a blind also, because our arrow has an arc. It's coming down. I don't care if it's 20 yards or 50 yards, it's still coming down. Every arc on every arrow, it goes out and then it comes down faster than it went up. Okay. That is the nature of an arc because of gravity and wind resistance, right? So that's every arrow. A real fast crossbow, it's less noticeable. Slow crossbow, it's real noticeable. But nonetheless, you're going to have it coming down a little bit. So your entrance wound is going to be a little higher than your exit wound almost always, regardless of your shooting method. Okay, that's just the nature of the beast. But that lower exit wound with these guys, like, you know, what do you want to have blood coming out of the animal on, right? Which one? What one do you think is going to leave a better blood trail, right? Which one? What one do you think? You can't even see this one now, right? You can't even see it. It's hiding. But that's the difference, right? Not sponsored by anybody, but man, I love the Swahackers. I love the name, everything about them, right? So everything that matters, I like about the Swahackers for a modern crossbow. And even with the OB, like I designed my arrows, I got heavier arrows primarily so I can use this. And I can push with a 563 grain zombie slayer. I got the extra inserts in here from Wyvern Creations. You put this bad boy on here, on this zombie, and I had pushed this through two different, I didn't use a zombie through a bear the second time, but the first time I did. Oh, first time I used a main hunter, but a heavier arrow. Using heavier arrows, right? But even on the old slow OB, I pushed a heavy spinal tap with this broadhead on there through a bore at 40 yards. That video's on YouTube. And it came, and that was through the shoulder and in and shoulder out, not shoulder blade, but through the meat, in and out. Probably the shield, the so-called shield, in and out with an old slow crossbow. That arrow was traveling around 250 feet per second, but it came out the other side of that bore and left a great blood trail and a big old swath, right? That was good stuff. So that is important. The other thing I would point out is deer after deer after deer. The only time I really haven't had a problem with these, I can't think of an instance where I had a problem related to that crossbow, so or to that broadhead rather. So I think that's pretty good stuff. So hopefully we're hitting close to an hour, and I better get to work. I got to go do some stuffs, right? Got a work outfit on here, ready to go. So I really want you guys. I'm going to go back through here and see that stuff. I'm going to type in a message before I get going. And I wonder if you guys remember the message that I type on these as we sign off on our live streams, right? What's that message? It's been a while since I did this stuff. But there you go. There you go. All hail Bunjie. Thank you for joining me. I hope you got a kick out of this stuff. Let me know your thoughts on broadheads. Leave them in the comments. We'll go from there. Until next time, all hail Bunjie. But seriously, have a great day. And thank you for joining me during Crossbow Appreciation Month. We'll see you soon, okay? Thanks, you guys. How do we get out of here? How do I end it? I don't even know how I end this thing. Boom. Are you sure you want to stop streaming? Unfortunately, yes. Thanks, you guys.